Since the very beginning of my YouTube channel, I've wanted to do nothing but review video games, but not just bad ones, good ones, or even obscure ones. I want to review games that I think are shining examples of what a video game should be, and I'm sure some of you are already aware of my absolute favorites, Doom Eternal, Halo 3, Dark Souls, but tonight, I want to talk about a game that I hold very near and dear to my heart, a game that's been labeled as beautiful and profound, just as it is horrific and disturbing, a game that's nostalgic and detached all the same, a game that's magic can never be captured again. A game called Silent Hill 2. After seeing the success that a game like Resident Evil had, Konami wanted to get in on this American horror craze that Japan only recently got out of in the late 80s, beginning development on a new horror game in 1996 that was supposed to be an adaptation of The Mist, a novel by Stephen Miner's having sex in the sewer king. Because of the limitations of the time period, however, the game would eventually drop that original title and opt for something a bit more original. The idea of dense gray fog being a point of iconography would still be present, but due to the combined forces of extremely creative and talented people and the small team of Team Silent, this story would end up a lot more grotesque and horrific than initially planned. It was a game that was full of disgustingly intricate artistry, blood-soaked walls and steel coated in rust as far as the eye could see, a world of suffocating darkness and demons, a game inspired by American and Japanese film alike, a game that's name was based on the hometown of several of the team's members, Shizuoka, or, when translated to English, Silent Hill. Even as someone that appreciates the appearance of older video games, it's not hard to see that the first Silent Hill game is a little rough around the edges, to say the least. It's not really colorful enough to be charming to me, and James' cardboard box looking ass pant legs will always be an incredible sight to behold. But back in 1999, this game was revolutionary. The FMV cutscenes were groundbreaking, and the way that this game had a world completely consisted of 3D polygons instead of being a pre-rendered background was completely unheard of, especially in the sheer scale that this game had to offer. Normally, a game like this would crash or chug because of the ancient PS1 hardware, but Team Silent had programmers that knew how to think outside the box. All of the darkness and fog throughout the game isn't just there to add to this sense of isolation and fear of the unknown. It's masking when certain objects load into view. It's covering up all those buildings and cars that only have one side fully textured, all in service of making a game that doesn't run as slow as, me. My cardio really sucks. Even when launching among some of the most prolific and influential games ever created, like Ocarina of Time and Metal Gear Solid, Silent Hill sold incredibly well. It had its time in the limelight, laid down the groundwork for what would become a household name of a franchise, and cemented Team Silent and Konami as a force to be reckoned with, especially in the horror genre. However, the talent, intelligence, and artistry that this team was capable of was only hinted at with the first Silent Hill game, as only a handful of months later after the first game's release, Konami would give Team Silent the green light to create something that to me is truly amazing. Something that would go down in history as one of the greatest horror games of all time. Something that I would dare to say is a masterpiece. Silent Hill 2 was being developed for the PlayStation 2, a console that had only recently launched, which gave Team Silent a lot of trouble in terms of the tech they had to work with, the basis of which every game functions. The engine was typically borrowed from existing software or created completely from scratch, though considering the new hardware being worked with, the game would have to quite literally be created from the ground up. Although it seemed that Team Silent really had their work cut out for them, the result of this seemingly hectic production would result in technology that somehow was just as revolutionary as the first installment of the series. Entirely new technology was made for this game that involved realistic lighting, the way that fog realistically moves and traverses the game's world and the character models. The concept of surround sound as we know it is partly due to the backbreaking work that this game's developers were doing. The developers of Silent Hill 2 set out to make a game that already had a story to work with, unlike the first game where they made a world first and then wrote a story around it to fit within it. The approach of this weird demonic cultist angle would be dropped in favor of something a lot more personal. As Tsuboyami puts it, it's a game about insanity and love. Several pieces of American culture would inspire certain aspects of this game and its characters. The music would be less typical and formulaic. Akira Yamaoka, the game's masterful composer, creating something that feels much more ethereal and dreamlike. Although the game didn't necessarily have a good launch in Japan, the game in the West would be widely regarded, especially several years later, as one of the best of all time. For the past several years, I'm sure you've seen YouTube videos crop up about how beautiful the game is, citing its unique atmosphere and the timelessness of its graphics, horror, and to a certain extent, its voice acting, which is going to sound weird to some people that have seen the game's voice acting, but stick with me. I'm gonna explain why I think it's actually pretty good. However, I am a no-good, dirty little zoomer, so the purpose of this video is to really ask the question of how well this game holds up over 2 decades later. Sure, it's on every single list of the best games ever created, but does that ring true? Has the game aged well? Are aspects of this game's writing really as nuanced and purposeful as people often state? Well, the only way to really know is to play it for myself, so I can find out if Silent Hill 2 really is a masterpiece. 23 years later. Resident Evil starts off with a group of police officers being chased by rabid zombie dogs in the middle of the woods. It's got fast-paced 90s music, people are getting their cankles bitten left and right, being mauled to death like a toddler to the cold hands of a pit bull. This shit's going crazy. Fatal Frame. You walk into this little Japanese temple area, everything's fucked up, everything's bad. Horror begin. Silent Hill 2? It simply starts off with the slow pan of a camera looking at a guy staring into the mirror that's over a sink. Nothing but this ethereal, echoing rhythm plays while this fella here checks himself out in a mirror. There's no demonic creatures, no exposition, no heart-thumping, pants-shitting music cues, it's just him. He stares into a mirror, completely expressionless, clawing at his face in an attempt to see if something is really there, his brow casting a shadow over his eyes, closing shut the only window to his humanity that we could have. This intro is amazing to me. It sets the mood for pretty much the rest of this game in a matter of seconds. There's a reason why it's so iconic. We cut away from this crusty FMV and now we're in full control. I think this bathroom on its own just really sums up the art style per se of this game. Just abandoned and covered in rust and actual shit. Not gonna lie, I just kind of want to stand here and take in the vibe of this music, the way it fades in and fades out. It almost sounds kind of happy, but we've got a town to explore and a lot of fog to traverse. I really hate when games do this thing in the intro where it allows you to control your character for approximately 2.7 seconds before throwing another cutscene in your face, something that the Zelda series is really particularly bad about, but I guess I really don't mind it because the little cutscene that plays is really something else. This goofy little fella is James Sunderland, a man who has driven to this old town of Silent Hill in search of his wife. He leans over this brick wall and regales himself with the note that his wife wrote him, stating that she'll be in their special place. That's all fine and dandy, but suddenly it hits James.
A dead person can't write a letter. Mary died of that damn disease 3 years ago.
Apparently, his wife Mary is dead and has been dead for 3 years, which begs a few obvious questions. The most obvious question to you, I'm sure, is why the dialogue sounds so strange. We could just say it's a product of its time. You know, we've all seen movies and shows from the 90s or the early 2000s.
Got a minute?
Huh? Get out of my space!
I just got done playing some PS1 fighting games. The voice acting is a fucking riot, but whether intentional or not, the way that people in this game speak, the way their voices sound so insulated and close to you, the way you can hear their mouth moving as they talk makes everything feel so disjointed and detached from reality, like a dream, like nothing here is real and it's all a group of voices bouncing around the walls inside your head. Combined with the airy music, the lack of color and everything that surrounds James, and the thin coat of fog that just barely allows sight at the lake on the other side of these trees, Silent Hill 2 sets us up with an impression of familiarity and detachment all the same. These are human beings, that is a car, and that is a filthy feces-smeared bathroom. But something isn't right. This dreary music that's been playing in the background quickly fades into something much more suspenseful. More tunes that fade in and out of reality and poke at your eardrums at a muddled pace. I run over to this shitty little 90s clit car and pick up the map to Silent Hill, setting off into the forest trail just on the other side of this wall. It's long, it's twisted, covered very thoroughly in fog, and as we run through, we can hear the sound of something else shuffling around just outside of view. Whatever it is, it's not going to jump scare us, it's not going to hop out into the road and force us into a quick time event where you spin the sticks on your controller around like you're stimulating your titties. It just stays barely out of view, just to make sure your mind is still chugging, just to strike you with a little bit of that fear of the unknown. The tune that begins playing is called, unsurprisingly, Forest Trail, and I feel as if it's a bit underused in the section of this game. It starts off with that weird, dark, and also evil ambience that fades in and fades out, but halfway through you hear this fucking terrifying little techno droning sound that comes out of nowhere and just slowly fades away. and then it fucking happens again and repeats for 5 godforsaken minutes. But you only really get that horrific sound effect if you listen to the track directly. In-game, that scary droning noise is only barely heard in the background, and it doesn't even really attack you like it does in the track itself. You'll probably barely even notice it was there unless you were listening to it in the soundtrack. Eventually we come across a little gazebo, and upon looking into it... Damn. How are you, James? Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself. After saving the game, we run through some more fog and stumble into a graveyard. Great. But instead of meeting some undead creature completely beyond my comprehension, we meet something else that is further beyond my comprehension. A woman. Her name is Angela, and after talking to her...
I'm kind of lost.
Lost?
I think her Silent Hill is on the spectrum. Angela and James exchange a few words, and the dialogue between these two I think is among some of the most strange and off-putting in the entire game. The way that several seconds of silence follow the beginning and end of every sentence, and the strange way that they enunciate and speak makes them seem more like something trying to be human. I wouldn't exactly put it on the same level of something like Oblivion either, because as stated before, the stilted and downright unsettling voice acting in this game ironically builds upon the aura of disconnection I explained earlier, as if the dense fog surrounding every foot we step into wasn't enough of a haze. Angela says she is looking for her mom, or I guess mama, but oddly enough is crouching before a grave. I never really noticed that detail until I was looking back through the footage and writing the script. Seems like she's in the same boat as us. If she's even fucking real, look at this dude's demon eyes. You really think he isn't capable of making a big scary world of his own? And then we set off once more, passing by some old abandoned buildings, some rusted old cars, and eventually make it to this little lifted road that leads to a caged off area to walk through. If the biggest road is this road that looks like it can only fit a Miata, and it's the only way to get into Silent Hill, I might just pack up my fucking bags and move there myself. I think a society of only Mazda Miatas isn't just an ethereal fog-covered dream, it's a fucking wet dream. Your first rebuttal is probably something along the lines of, you think living in a town full of demonic flesh creatures is a wet dream? I already live in a city full of baseball cap-wearing honkies and greasy, insecure hood rats who drive the same garbage compactor sounding ass Challengers, clown shoe BMWs, and scrawny Mexicans with slammed infinities that sound like a mosquito buzzing in my ear. As far as I'm concerned, buddy, I'm already in hell. The music finally changes from these strange but melancholic tunes we've been hearing thus far into something that, in my opinion, is just as iconic to Silent Hill as fog. Akira Yamaoka isn't just a master of soft, majestic tunes. He can create some downright disturbing ambience as well. The most common you'll be hearing is something like this. There's this ongoing theme in the ambience of Silent Hill music and just straight up ambience of machinery and metal. You don't just hear the same generic rising violin or string instruments or crashing noises. It's music that sounds just as rusted and decrepit as Silent Hill looks. It's music that just doesn't sound like music. It pulses and grinds. It sounds like there's something just out of you doing its own thing, and you're hopeless to ever know its purpose. Finally, we make it to the town, a place that jumped right out of the late 90s and early 2000s, complete with dated designs and building appearances symbolic of a time long past. James stumbles across some blood smears here on the ground, and the camera flies like fucking Superman over to this very poorly obscured creature stumbling into the fog. I'm assuming they were trying to do the whole silhouette thing that Halo Combat Evolved did in the Flood mission, but yeah, you can pretty clearly see what this thing is, big butt cheeks and all. James hasn't fucked in a hot minute, 3 years to be exact, so he's on the prowl, he's hungry, he's craving some lying figussy. After chasing after it for a while, we find it once again, walled into this weird little area while it munches on a corpse. James doesn't really seem to notice the blood-soaked Lovecraftian horror currently going to town on a dead guy, though he just kind of sees this little radio here and just kind of zeroes in on it. He's like, oh, I've wanted one of these ever since I was a kid. I don't know why this game is even trying to make it seem as if he doesn't notice the giant demon 5 feet away from him, but anyway. The combat in this game is very clunky. It's got tank controls, you know, your Resident Evils, no, that's the best example I got. You know what I'm talking about. It's definitely something that takes some time getting used to. You have to hold the trigger to get James into this hit stance, and then you press X to actually attack. Every enemy takes the same amount of hits to take down, usually, and after 3 hits they go to the ground and you just press X to kick them in the head and leave with their lunch money. Weirdly enough, if you click trigger and X, you do the regular attack instead of a kick on a downed enemy, and it seems like they're literally invincible. I don't remember this being a thing when I initially played this game back when I was in middle school, but when I'd attack them with a wood fucking pan mantle, I would just keep hitting them infinitely until they stood back up and sprayed me with cum. I don't know why slamming wood into a thing's skull is something that actively heals them, but all you really need to do to prevent this is not doing it.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, I forgot I had Skittles in here. Weirdly enough, what sounds to be Mary starts calling to James through the radio he just picked up, so back into the town we go. There's so much about Silent Hill that makes it feel like so much more than just a typical horror game, and the aspects of Silent Hill that make it what it is stretch so much further than terrifying monsters or constricting darkness. During the development of the first two games, a handful of the game's developers went to a late 90s America, really getting a feel for the way that American cities and towns were designed and arranged. The realism that they achieved with this is outstanding, and is something I think makes Silent Hill both so terrifying and oddly nostalgic or comfortable. As someone that grew up in the 2000s, a lot of my childhood was spent in a place that was just getting out of the 90s, so a lot of furniture, towns, and art were things that surrounded me the most from that time period. One of the things that makes Silent Hill feel so oddly comfortable and familiar is the way that the town itself appears. If you grew up in the same time period I did, especially in a small town or somewhere in the South, chances are you've been somewhere that looks just like this. Every single aspect of Silent Hill's creation feels representative of the late 90s and early 2000s, from the cars pulled over on the side of the road to the very wallpaper you see in the rooms of apartment buildings. I have very vivid memories as a kid going to small places like this, whether it was passing through, eating at some Mexican restaurant, pizzeria, or maybe even visiting family. Of course, the memories you have as a literal toddler aren't going to be the most clear, making your recollection of events foggy and disjointed all in their own right, making the town of Silent Hill all the more unsettling, like a town that leaped right out of my earliest memories before being corrupted by evil. I wander through the town, beat some skin goblins to death before making it to the very edge of the town to discover the road is completely caved in. Well, we really are trapped. The way that the radio that James has now begins to fizzle with static when a monster is close is creepy as fuck, don't get me wrong. But what's even scarier to me is when you just hear them shuffling around just outside of your view. I know James really wants to flex his swinging arm right now, but the kind of stress that this induces in me just makes me want to keep running. I don't ever want to stop running, can't stop the A train. After finding a note in some old abandoned mobile home, we find a note that points us towards a bar right down the road, and I feel a turd groundhog its way out of my ass every single time I graze the hitbox of some scary ass demon. We finally make it to the bar, and only to be met with a dark, empty room and a marked map on the counter. I've always loved this little room. I know that the writing on the glass is iconic, but the way this room has barely any light being cast into it because of all the papers, it looks so damn good. I often forget this game was on a PS2, especially later in the game. It has some really damn good looking environments. Sure, the animations are wonky and the facial expressions are very wonky, and if you look close enough to textures, they're gonna look pretty pixelated, but I always thought this game looks timeless. Better than the FMVs, actually. There used to be a hole here, it's gone now. Alright, we get to the area marked on the map that we found, coming across some of those things and stepping on a beetle that sounds like a fucking tricycle, but all it really leads to is a health bottle and, this guy, completely mauled to death and wearing an awfully familiar outfit to James. Strange, very strange. I know we already talked about the revolutionary technology made for the first two Silent Hill games, but honestly there's so much about this game that impresses me to this day, not just in its graphics like I've already talked about, but with small details. Like every time James runs over a corpse, you can see bloody footprints behind him for a little while, or if you sprint for a long time, the speed starts to slow down and James starts panting like a dog when you stop running. Maybe I'm just not giving the PS2 enough credit and remember it being weaker than it actually is, but when you look at other games for the same exact console released in the same time period, I feel like the difference is night and day. Jesus fucking Christ, that constant industrial echoing that plays as you run through this town is fucking terrifying. The first place that the game brings us to is this apartment building. Yeah, it's just an apartment building, not some sort of regal mansion or sci-fi space station. It's just an apartment building, and then a hospital, and then a prison, and so on and so forth. Going back to what I was saying before, this game isn't unnerving because of the way it thrusts you into an area of unfamiliarity, but precisely because these areas are so familiar is what makes them scary. Everyone has been to an apartment building, a school, a bowling alley, so when you take such a seemingly normal place and disrupt the monotony with horror, it makes for an experience that feels all the more disturbing and paints a picture of warped reality. quality that I feel like games rarely capture. The constant fog that surrounds you in this game already takes advantage of that inherent human fear of the unknown, but this is the first area in the game where that fear and that darkness that is ever present truly begins to feel suffocating. This entire building is just not being able to see the other side of the hallway because it's so fucking dark, and hearing the footsteps of slowly approaching creatures around the corner, it's genuinely some of the scariest fucking horror this game has to offer, and gaming as a whole. The first puzzle that we come across in this apartment is when we walk into this washroom and see what looks like a fucking homemade bomb shoved into the top of this trash chute. We'll eventually get to this riddle being solved, don't worry, but one thing I never understand is why James doesn't use this big ass stick in his hand to push it down. You can clearly see enough room between the top of the chute and the trash for James' little piece of plywood here to fit, so I don't know why they didn't just render the trash further down, or maybe add some piece of dialogue that says, "The trash is stuck too far down the chute to push down manually." Sure, he could just drop the wood, but at that point he wouldn't have anything to protect him, so I guess we'll leave it here and keep stumbling down hallway after hallway. Locked. 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 Bingo. Well, damn. It's about time we get some way to see in this fucking hellhole. Right after picking up the flashlight, we awaken this thing. It's just the legs of a mannequin mirrored on the x-axis, and yeah, for something so simple and borderline stupid, it's pretty effectively creepy. Just looking at the way it moves and its arms, or I guess legs, just kind of flail around, reminds me of the arms of a bug or something, and I fucking hate bugs. Seems to be a lot of insectisms in this game now that I'm thinking about it. There's that little singing beetle that flies around, those armless flesh creatures that skitter around like cockroaches if you don't kick them to death fast enough, and this leg thing moves its arms like the front two fangs of a spider or something, even though almost everything in this game has a purpose behind it. I'll be honest, I think all the insect-like behavior is just kind of to be disturbing, which I'm okay with. It's honestly jarring to see these creatures or their body parts flail around wildly while James and other human characters seem to move around pretty normally, and, well, there's actually a reason why. Silent Hill 2's main characters were all motion captured, all of the physical performances recorded on an actual set, another aspect of the video games industry that essentially had its foundation laid down by Silent Hill 2. However, motion capture is expensive, and Konami had already spent a metric ton of money on advertising, so Team Silent settled on only mocapping the human characters, leaving everything else, i.e. the monsters, to be animated manually through keyframes. But the oddly simple 1000 IQ move of manually animating only the monsters to give them movements that seem that much more inhuman is just like, it's so effective. Here's a part where James gets so fucking pissed he slams a monster through a wall. After wandering through dark corridors for another handful of minutes, we eventually come across a room that has the beginning of a riddle in it, which begins the puzzle side of Silent Hill. Believe it or not, the game isn't just walking, hitting things, and being depressed. There's actually some decently constructed puzzles within this series as well. If Silent Hill is supposedly a real town and not just a manifestation of one's psyche, then I really don't know why there are things like this lying around. Like, yeah, I know it's just a video game thing and you're just not supposed to think about it for some reason, but I'm not sure that in a game where every single little detail is realistic and has some sort of thought behind it, that I like using the just don't think about it argument. Did some crazy old heroin addict just make these for fun? Are these some sort of hallucination? But if they were a hallucination, then how does James interact with them? I don't know, man. We come across some more pieces to the puzzle that will eventually result in moving this clock out of place, but first, the sound effect that plays in this single little area and literally nowhere else is so viscerally unnerving to me that every time I walk through here, I genuinely try to leave as quick as I can just so I don't have to hear it. Eventually, James finds this little set of bars in the middle of a hallway with a key on the other side. Silly little James reaches through, but right when he's about to grab the keys, this little shithead runs in and kicks it away. I know that this game was really impressive and it's time for how cinematic it is, and don't get me wrong, a lot of that has aged very well, but some of the camera work in this game is just really obnoxious and annoying. Like, I don't think it was necessary to make the camera bounce back and forth like I just woke up from a crack bender to really feel the extreme impact of a kick from a 9-year-old. She runs off and James figures that he can't reach the key on the other side of the bars even though he's got a giant piece of ply. You know, I never realized how many problems in this game could be solved if James would just use that big piece of wood in his hands currently right now. James doesn't need no wood because he's got some nickel instead.
What you got about it, bro?
I spoke a little bit before on how the combat in this game is clunky and slow, but I didn't really talk about how, in a backwards way, it makes the game better. You don't really see this with the handgun or the other weapons you find later because it's mostly just with this melee weapon. The game has tank controls, as already mentioned, which means that you have to turn James' whole ass body to face something and then attack them. With the guns, he just auto-locks onto enemies if he's in their general vicinity, so there's not really a problem there. And with the wood, the worst thing you have to look out for is not getting close to these things when they spray green bile all over you, which seem pretty pretty impossible to do sometimes, not gonna lie. And while that kinda sucks, I feel that one important thing to clarify is that yes, the combat is indeed clunky, but it was never frustrating. I never felt like I died because of the combat or the combat was holding me back. It felt adequately slow-paced and grounded, which is a good move because you don't want a game that's supposed to be heavily emotional, hazy, and I'm going to use this word again because I'm running out of synonyms, ethereal, to have such an intense focus on something that should realistically only be 1/4 the focus of the game. Beyond a mechanical level, however, the slowness of the combat itself makes you just feel vulnerable. You can't fucking clamber over walls, double jump, or Dark Souls roll through enemies. You stand still, wait for an opening, and attack. Kinda like most people would in real life. Kinda like an average Joe would. You know, that thing that James is extremely commonly referred to as. On this week's episode of repetitive Silent Hill sound effect that plays in one specific area for no reason that unnerves me greatly. There's a red bedroom in this apartment with a bunch of butterflies flying around and just a single hole oozing green liquid in the wall. Want to see what happens? Some may think that this is stupid and pointless, but these little subtle scares that keep you on your toes are precisely what make the horror in this game unlike any other. James fisting. Does anyone else think it feels good to just run in this game? That probably sounds weird, but something about the way it's animated and the sound effects are always just... Do I need to say anything? Do I really need to say anything? This is so fucking scary. The very next room we walk into has a dead body covered in blood, just kind of sitting in a chair, head hunched over, blonde hair and a green jacket. Huh. You know what? James has blonde hair and a green jacket. James just kind of wipes his brow and goes, what in the world? James' reaction to seeing a mutilated corpse is like seeing an unmarked car at a handicapped parking spot. So that first clue from earlier, it was telling the tale of some little story about 3 people who were varying in different sizes. And considering this was in the same apartment room as the clock, it's pretty obvious that it's talking about the clock. What's weird about this area though is that you don't really even need that first clue that you find. You could literally just look at this thing etched into the wall and solve the puzzle on its own. Well, I pull the arms into the right place, solving a pretty mindless puzzle, and watching James, I can't squat 200 below parallel Sunderland, barely manage to push this clock out of the way, showing us this big gaping hole that leads to the second half of the dungeon. Did I just say dungeon? I mean, I guess these are dungeons, aren't they? That's not important, however. What is important is the official introduction of the iconic, the powerful, the terrifying Pyramid Head. We find him pinning this leg thing to the counter of the kitchen and doing this. People always say that what he's doing right here is let's just say something that would get me demonetized if I said it, but it doesn't really look like he's doing that. It looks to me like he's just kind of choking it out or restricting it. What follows is possibly one of the most weirdly animated and confusing cutscenes I think I've ever seen. James just kind of hides in a closet with his flashlight turned up to max brightness, and Pyramid Head throws this thing on the ground and starts doing some interpretive dancing. Then he slowly walks over, looks around for a second, tries and fails to use the force on James, and then James starts letting off some heat, and then we're back to the game. We grab a few keys, one of which is the one that dumb little fucker kicked out of James' hand earlier, get some fresh air, get lost for half an hour, and eventually find a 6-pack of juice. Run back to the washroom, drop the juice down the chute instead of drinking it. With the amount of time I've had to wait for this, there better be something fucking good in here. Great, it's what I've always wanted. There's a newspaper in this trash bag as well that talks about a killing that happened in Silent Hill by some lunatic talking about a red demon haunting him and making him commit his crime before killing himself in prison. Kind of sounds like Epstein. That's a story that sounds just oddly specific enough that I think I'll keep that in mind. You got a notepad? You better be writing this shit down. I can't fucking snap. I can't snap my fucking... Turns out that this coin we got wasn't just some newfangled coin crypto scam. It's another piece to a puzzle, possibly one of the most memorable puzzles in this game, in my opinion. The puzzle isn't finding some pieces of something in some arbitrary areas hidden throughout the map or flipping switches in the right order. It's something that genuinely requires thought, something that I always excitedly whip out a notepad for or something to figure it out. On our way to find these last few coins, however, we stumble across another character that will very quickly find his permanent spot within the cast. After investigating the sounds of a dude literally throwing the fuck up, we find this guy, this fat college looking dude vomiting into a toilet toilet. The very first thing he starts talking about is how he didn't do it, referring to presumably the dead guy in the kitchen. We can reasonably assume that he was just killed, which is why this dude, Eddie, is so bent out of shape and still, obviously in denial.
It wasn't me. I didn't do it.
Do what?
I didn't do anything. I swear. He was like this when I got here.
Bow out, 50 cal, ran up in her mouth, ayy, chewy on my Louis.
Eddie, be careful.
James, you be careful too.
Well, that was fun. We collect 3 coins that are all involved in the puzzle I mentioned a second ago, and I will be the first to admit that I was stuck on it for a good while. With a lot of this game's progression, I noticed that it really is pretty straightforward. There is an extremely unlikely chance you will ever be filtered out of a certain area or come up against an impassable wall. Because if as long as you do just the bare minimum and go into each and every room, the way that you progress is pretty simple, a little too easy even, but this shit's pretty difficult. Kinda makes me curious to see what Team Silent is really capable of when they don't hold back. Also, fun fact, the copy of Silent Hill I have, I picked it up from a local game shop, literally came with a piece of paper that some guy wrote the puzzles on. I potentially have a little piece of 2-decade-old history in my hands right here. If someone out there by some miraculous chance recognizes this, let me know if this was you. And send hot pics. As we near the end of this entire area, we come across a room with a white door, something that I don't think we've seen thus far, and within it, one of the most gorgeous compositions in this game accompanies the sight of Angela, the woman from the graveyard from earlier, lying almost lifelessly on the floor, holding a knife, staring soullessly into the mirror before her. Her and James exchange a few words, their interaction just as strange as the rest of the game. James even offers to hold her potential suicide weapon for her. Aw, what a white knight. However, the moment she gives it to him, Angela freaks the fuck out and runs away, somewhere into the dark, somewhere into the town. I want you to take a note of the things she says, the way she contemplates taking this road of death, the way that her attitude changes with the drop of a hat, going from cold and contemplative to explosive and horrified.
I'll be okay by myself. Besides, I just slow you down.
What about that?
Will you hold it for me?
Sure. No problem.
If I kept it, I'm not sure what I might do.
We're in for the home stretch now, running through some more dark apartment corridors covered in water, walking along a balcony of 2 connected rooms that give us a good look at the gray void that surrounds us, then opening a door that leads us to... So, remember when I said that thing about me not thinking Pyramid Head was violating that other mannequin creature? Yeah, no, I'm pretty sure that's what he's doing here. The game wastes no time at all throwing you directly into this fight. You and Pyramid Man only just sharing this small little space that forces you to run from one side to the other as he approaches. James is well aware that Pyramid Head wants the heat, okay? But every time he fires, I can very clearly hear the sounds of bullets hitting metal. I'm assuming that really isn't doing anything, so the strategy I adopt is goading him into attacking, running behind him mid-attack and just lighten him up. That doesn't really seem to do anything either. I played through this boss fight 100 times and I don't ever really feel like I know what I'm doing. You could tell me this is time-based and I'd probably believe you. I did some research, and by research I mean I scrolled through a few posts on the amazing Totally Flawless website Reddit, and a lot of people on there are saying that it is indeed a timed encounter, but the more damage you put into him, the quicker the encounter ends. Despite that, I think the only thing I actively dislike about this fight is the sound design. If every single bullet I'm putting into him is doing damage, then there really needs to be some other sound effect besides playing the sound of a bullet literally ricocheting off of his helmet. It makes it feel like I'm not really doing anything. So instead of letting this tense encounter pan out, I had to pause it after thinking I wasn't doing anything and look up what the fuck was going on. After I grow wrinkles and have grandkids, Pyramid Head just kind of decides to leave and walks into this poopy diarrhea water and fucks off. Oh yeah, the Silent Hill siren sound effect. I kind of forgot this was a Silent Hill game, not gonna lie. It's actually kind of insane to me how the cramped, dark atmosphere of that apartment building is so painfully tense that even when you just get spit out right back into the scary-ass foggy streets of this town, it feels so liberating. Oh great, this little bitch.
You! It was you, wasn't it? You're the one who stepped on my hand.
I don't know. Maybe I did.
James, you have a gun. Why don't you use it? James talks to this little girl for a second, and all she really does is be a little girl, but the conversation ends with,
You didn't love Mary anyway.
so now we've got another little creature on our hit list besides Pyramid Head is what I'm seeing. We in fact do not find the small child to quote bust a cap into, as Chief Keef would say, but all we do find is a prostitute. This woman is Maria, some lady who looks eerily close to Christina Aguilera at the Kids' Choice Awards in 1999. James is pretty obsessed with the fact that she looks like his dead wife, but Maria ain't having it. As a matter of fact, she roasts his dead fucking wife in front of him.
Just your hair and clothes are different.
My name is Maria. I don't look like a ghost, do I?
The first thing you probably notice is that she's dressed very interestingly. She's got her greasy ass cleavage hanging out. She's showing her stomach. She's got this ugly tattoo on her waist, and she looks like Mary, apparently. Doesn't act like her, though, very obviously.
The Lakeview Hotel? Yeah, it's still there. So the hotel was your special place, huh? I'll bet it was.
Loneliness is my finesse. Singing in the flesh when you got didn't measure. Limited freshness, burning for depth. Money, I need less.
James starts yapping on about his and Mary's special place, remembering that it's a certain hotel across the lake. Maria seems well versed enough in this town, which is weird, and points James in the right direction. Right off the bat, Maria seems weird. Suspicious even. There are a lot of points in the dialogue where she says really off-color things and even taunts James directly as if she knows something that he doesn't, maybe even something that we don't know as the player. Suffice it to say, I'm pretty uneasy around her, but I guess we can't leave her here to die, so we take her with us. No, Maria, I'm not subbing to your OnlyFans. Even though I get the feeling she's not letting on everything bouncing around that little blonde head of hers, I'll admit that the constant suffocating dread that persists throughout this entire game while you explore the town weakens just a little bit now that we've got someone with us. Of course, the first thing I do trying to impress her is waste an entire 17 hours of time running down a seemingly endless road just to find out I was going the wrong way and turning back around. Despite that, this is a moment I really like in the game, even if it's small. No, not meeting Maria or going the wrong way, but this section of the game has this evening sun that you can just barely see, giving everything this subtle orange glow, making things feel both scarier and more comfortable. Kinda reminds me of Halo 3. Even in a video about Silent Hill 2, I can't shut the fuck up about Halo 3. We eventually find a bowling alley, to which Maria says,
I'll wait here. I hate bowling.
Yeah, you would. You would, Maria. You would hate bowling. You would hate such an essential part of the American dream, Maria. If it isn't recording yourself rolling around in mud or eating fake cum for money, it's probably something you don't want to do, Maria. This bowling alley is hands down one of my absolute favorite places in the game. Not because of any boss fight or encounter or because of some stupid afternoon glow or diarrhea-inducing sound effect, but because of something else. I think for once I'm gonna stop my yapping and just sit here and let you take in this moment with me. When we first walk into the building, we find Eddie eating pizza and this little girl running around making fucking chaos as usual before she blesses every one of us by running off. To which James says this iconic line,
This town is full of monsters. How can you sit there and eat?
But what makes this place so special is the atmosphere. The music is funky and soft, continuing with this droning tune that seems to echo throughout the very building we stand in. It's an area of the game I always like to come to and just stand here and take it in. Akira Yamaoka's a fucking genius. The first thing that James does after leaving the bowling alley is trying to pursue this little girl. Chat, don't clip that. Though him and Maria hit the end of an alleyway, but thankfully, Maria knows her way around this town. And cock! And when she turns to the left, there's a door there, and she leads us into her back door. The back door. Yet again, we're met with another dark environment with some of the most gorgeous music I've ever heard. It's a little club called Heaven's Night, a literal strip club that I'm sure you could tell with the way Maria speaks, acts, and dresses she's very familiar with. James doesn't really like the smell of cigarette butts and decade-old cum stains, so it doesn't take long for us to book it out of here. After getting back onto another place Maria is just as familiar with as the club, the streets, we eventually spot Laura running into a hospital, quickly following her inside. Come on, it's a horror game, there has to be a hospital. The hospital has to easily be one of the most unnerving areas in the game, not just because it's the intro for the iconic nurses and seeing things that are more humanoid is just inherently creepier than anything else, but the building has so many rooms, floors, and corners, and considering how the only light in this earthly fucking realm is the one you've got on James's tit, not knowing what could be behind these wide variety of areas is extremely unsettling to say the least. We look at a board, pick up the map for the hospital, equip that blicky, as NLE Choppa famously said, and then do something most mumble rappers probably can't do: read. They're all a bunch of papers and reports about different patients that have been staying in the hospital, and after beating the game and knowing what happens, I've got to say they're just as important as the newspaper we read earlier in that trash bag in the apartment shoot. The first paper talks about a patient that was normally a model citizen, calm, cooperative, normal, everything that this game is not. Though the paper also says that this is a patient who has tried to commit 3 times, meaning that he must be watched closely because of these potential bombastic attempts. The next report talks about someone with an illness who believes he is guilty for the death of his daughter, with symptoms being cited such as psychotic breaks and paranoid delusions. These are details that sound far too specific to just be something that a designer put in to be creepy, and that's because they probably are. The report I find to be the most interesting is the very last one sitting next to this typewriter. To paraphrase, it's written by a doctor who talks about a patient that seems to believe in another world that they live in constantly, a world that's close and distant. The doctor gives some thought to the idea that this world is something that exists objectively and not just within the mind of this single crazy person. But the note ends and we pick up something called the purple cow key. Since we're teleporting in and out of every room, the game always designates a certain area for Maria to be standing, and every single time it gives me a fucking jump scare just seeing her silhouette standing there staring at me. The hospital handles puzzles and memory games a lot better than the apartment, in my opinion. One of the first pieces to a puzzle you find in the hospital is a random paper that has some psycho rambling on about a code to a box, and what I was expecting was to just go into another room and find a box with a lock in it and very simply just remember the number, but it's not incorporated until much earlier, which is an approach I appreciate much more than just kind of going through the motions. I don't think I talked about it before, but it goes without saying that Silent Hill 2 easily has some of the most amazing texture and environment work of any video game I think I've ever seen. There's a reason why anytime you see some rusted old building or some abandoned area or just any fog in general, you're inevitably gonna have some fucking asshole going, "Silent Hill?" ? And that's not just because it's iconic and consistent throughout the series, but because it's such a unique and realistic style that just, God, it takes my breath away every time I play these games. Going beyond the ironically impressive mundane design of these environments, the texture work, while still looking a little pixelated, especially when played through an emulator, has aged gracefully. The character models, the use of color, the incredible lighting effects, as if the game couldn't have enough going for it already. The artistic aspect of it is just as powerful. We wander into a locker room with a bikini woman poster because it's a Japanese game and every single one of them has to have that for some reason. And then James picks up a needle because all of this running from monsters has got him aching for a good sounding session. And then we pick up a godforsaken shotgun. I was gonna make a Doom joke, but the Doom community has ruined any and every joke ever made revolving around it, so I'm not even gonna try. Silent Hill is doing that Silent Hill thing again, where for no discernible reason a single area of the game has incredibly disturbing droning noises playing, but eventually Maria gets tired, her fucking pussy starts aching or something, so she drops a few Benadryls and just kind of lays down, calls it a day. Alright. The first thing I notice upon leaving her behind in that room is that it smells much better now, but I do have to admit that I feel much more isolated and lonely now that Maria isn't here. The progression of the hospital leads us to the roof, which is an area that reminds me of that rooftop mission in the first Metal Gear game. There's something about the fact that you should realistically be able to see something out there beyond the roof that is just like so disturbing to me. Like, you should be able to see other buildings, streetlights, the moon, something, anything, but the fact that nothing is there at all is so... Were my pants always this brown? The first time I saw this, I genuinely felt my heart sink into my fucking colon, and it wasn't even the part where he swings, it was this little part where his tiny little red tip scuffles up to me from the corner of the frame. James falls into the roof of this area, and right when he takes a step into the Insano room, he starts doing this for some reason. I went into my inventory and immediately noticed a really cool detail, which is that my health was dangerously low from the encounter with Pyramid Head, which is some really good attention to detail on behalf of the programmers, or the writers. I don't know, it was somebody's idea. Then we finally find Laura, and James just fucking corners her in this room like she's a scared little animal. Bro, back off, chill. What's interesting is that Laura elaborates on how she knows Mary, saying that her and Mary were in the same hospital. That's coincidental enough in its own right, but what's important is that she says she met Mary a year ago, even though in the first few lines that James speaks in this game, he clearly states that Mary died 3 years ago. How could Laura have known Mary 2 years after she supposedly died? James here almost pops a freaking blood vessel from how pissed it makes him hearing this, but he eventually calms down, and him and Laura make their way out. To James' surprise, Laura says she has another note from Mary, but silly James, it's not a note. It's actually a Tom and Jerry level trap with a big flesh bed demon with a fleshlight mouth. Very strange how Laura specifically knows that these things are in here and doesn't really seem to be scared of them at all, but that is epic. This boss fight is pretty much the same as every other one we've encountered and will encounter, which means that for the duration of the fight we just kind of run around in circles while these things hover around with a very disturbing lack of animation as they do so. It doesn't take long to achieve the victory royale, as James puts it, but the moment the fight ends, things go blurry. James gets thrown into a stretcher by goblins, and all you hear in the background is James. The way she softly says his name while fucking nuke sirens go off is so fucking skin crawling. I'm starting to think I just have a fear of oddly structured rooms, because for some reason the fact that this little area is just grass with concrete walls and no ceiling is like so scary to me. What can I say? It's that contractor in me. From everything we've been through, not gonna lie, I forgot that this was a Silent Hill game again. I really like how this game handles the whole Silent Hill world aspect. Sure, it's still got that blood and rust that it's iconic for, but it largely seems to be focused around the color green, and everything just kind of looks like it's covered in moss and rot, as if everything is decaying slowly. James comes across a fridge just kind of laying here in the middle of this empty room, but poor James just sits around and plays Apex Legends all day, so he doesn't really seem to have the alpha muscle mass to pry it open, so he's got to daintily walk all the way back to another portion of the building to find his queen. So, after blasting cleavage monsters with his shoddy and laying his eyes upon what's possibly one of the most disturbing renders I've ever seen, Maria finally shows back up, but she's not happy.
Anyway! What do you mean, anyway? You don't sound very happy to see me.
She gets pissed at James for leaving her. Bitch, you fell asleep in the middle of literal hell. That's like getting mad someone left you behind on the beaches of Normandy on D-Day because you wanted to go off and goon in the water. What did you expect me to do, sit there and wait for you to finish? She shoots between screaming and being pissed to this almost cartoony depiction of a damsel in distress, telling James that he was supposed to save her and supposed to stay with her. Maria wears the pants in this relationship. She hunches down with her weird lizard neck and flips the top of this fridge clean off of its fucking hinges, but all it's got inside is a few rings. The fuck are these supposed to go? It was obvious the second I got these that they were supposed to go on that creepy ass hand painting on the door, so James slides those puppies on, and now we find ourselves running down this grody hallway and moving on to the way Pyramid Head just kind of materializes out of nowhere and starts quietly running after you is so pants-shittingly terrifying. No loud, lame-ass sound effects, no screaming or obnoxiously loud music, just this absolute freak of a man running after you with a spear. James makes it right into the elevator, however, Maria isn't so lucky.
Open up!
Maria?
Maria, the look-alike of James' wife, the supposed clone of her, the last human connection that James had left in this hellish town, gone and claimed by the hand of Pyramid Head. For the next handful of minutes, the game just allows you to grieve. Every single door on your way out locked with this slow-paced piano tune playing. This is something that a lot of games even now don't do and could learn from. Far too often does a game have a major character death but hardly gives the player enough time to let it sink in on their own volition. No corny flashback sequence, no annoying dialogue, no instant jump into combat to keep the player's interest. It's just dark corridors and soft melodies. Thank you. It's pitch black outside now, so that comfortable morning fog that once completely surrounded every building and block is now replaced by a seemingly never-ending darkness. The streets now littered with nurses, their feminine figures a constant reminder of what he just lost. Truly a Silent Hill. It's crazy how such a simple lighting change can change this game's atmosphere so drastically. It really feels like your own little world because of this tiny little light source you have, like you're always running from something because you can't see more than 2 feet ahead of you. Suddenly, these streets seem a lot more oppressive, and these long tunnels that were once like a gateway to a new world are now some sort of hellish, restrictive force that can only be ran through as fast as you can. There's a part in this section where you run through this tunnel with a floor only consisted of fences, and while at first it is pretty creepy to see that below you there's literally nothing, but what made my heart sink was hearing the sound of these fucking meat monsters crawling around like monkeys along the floor. They only hurt you slightly, but the same effect I get from them is the same effect as like imagining a bug crawling all over me. I want to avoid this at all costs. It's a long walk, picking up the pieces of a short puzzle that leads us through different areas we've visited throughout the game, only now it's less like a haunting atmosphere and more like the fantasy of a 4 out of 10 ginger girl. surrounded by black. The Silent Hill Historical Society is where some of the game's most blatant horror begins. The horror throughout this game, from its very start, has been minute, subtle, specific, and while that most certainly doesn't stop here, the most oppressive and disturbing parts of the game truly start in this area. Before really jumping into the fun stuff, I take a look at all of the paintings in this first room, one of which is an extremely well done illustration of Pyramid Head, and the cover of the extended soundtrack. I didn't really pay any of the lore here any mind because I was playing this game under a completely different lens than I was supposed to be per se, but I won't get into that until later in the video. The horror truly begins as James runs down a dark stairway that seems to go on forever. Just a long session of running into an infinite void with nothing but the sounds of footsteps reverberating off of the walls that surround him. The end of the stairway leads into this small, disgusting room
9/11.
that leads to another room that has the same hole we saw in that painting earlier. Jumping into it drops us into a well, and I spent way too long here than I care to admit, just walking around in circles, not knowing what to do. To be fair, I was 100% doing the right thing, but just kind of gave up before hitting the part of the well I was supposed to interact with. James walks through a sewer before walking into this room, which upon walking into and picking up this key, the fucking light goes out. I'm freaking out. I'm going crazy. I'm hitting the stanky leg and all that fun stuff, but a quick glance into my inventory reminds me that I've got a battery. Well, thank God. My second biggest fear is the dark, with the first being bugs. Good fucking God, just looking at the way these things hover around on the walls is freaking me out. There's a numpad on the door with the correct buttons partially lit up for some reason. After trying and erring a few times, I finally make it the fuck out. Jesus Christ. Lucky for James, there's another hole to jump into. So, yeah, he does that. This time, though, we find a familiar face. He seems to be far gone this time around, completely out of his fucking mind. We don't see him eating pizza and not putting on deodorant. Now he's going on about murder, waving a gun around, completely in denial of what he's done, even saying that it's not a big deal. Before James can really do anything, he just kind of scurries off again, though. The prison is the next dungeon, and the absolute level of horror here that's kind of passively on display is almost guaranteed to keep you on your toes. This music of someone just fucking going down on a metal grate is spine-chilling. The way that every aspect of the environment just blends into this disgusting amalgamation of rust and grime. Usually with the areas in this game, they're creepy, sure, but there's always that certain area that you want to just sprint through to avoid it. The creepy stairwell noise in the apartment, that weird little grassy room in the hospital, but the prison, that's the entire fucking thing. It's got what little humanity is to be found in a prison still going for it, but it's so gross and makes me so uncomfortable that I very badly want to leave. And I feel like now I need to go play a more lighthearted game just to feel clean again. Like Silent Hill 1. And by far one of the creepiest, goosebump-inducing areas in this entire game is this prison block room. It seems normal enough, quiet even, which is good considering the first one we walked through was full of these fucking things screaming at me, but instead of hearing shuffling and loud, violent orgasms, we just hear whatever the actual fuck these footsteps are coming from is up in that dark fenced-off area above the prison cells, and you never see it, ever, not once. It is literally up there for you to imagine the most horrific image you could muster, knowing that it lies just completely out of... Eventually, we get a hunting rifle, which I don't really think was needed. Is that a controversial take? I don't know, man. Just liking this game is a controversial take now. It didn't ever really feel like it needed to be here. I use it a few times, sure, but when I'm well aware it's probably the most powerful gun in the game, then why wouldn't I? The big overarching puzzle in the prison is these little slabs you find scattered all over the place, wandering from one room to another, eventually needing 3 to slot into this little area in the foundation of a big hanging station. Nooses are quite scary on their own, sure, but this area they're in is invoking the same dread I felt in that small little area in the hospital. It's so oddly creepy being in an area with grass after being in an environment that looks like this. You'd think that it would bring me some sort of comfort, but it just unnerves me even more. It's unnatural. Grass shouldn't be here. The part that almost made me put my controller down altogether, though, maybe the inside of the prison is the best place to be right now. Wait, is this the footstep room? Goodbye. I just realized I've been completely neglecting that prison cell room out of sheer actual fear, so I guess I gotta just suck it the fuck up and run in there and try to open every single cell and stop it, you're fucking gross, I fucking hate you, I fucking hate you. After putting these 3 tablets into ye old hanging area, we are given a horseshoe so James can be a real man and start beating people's heads in, but what it really does is just combine with candle wax and a lighter to act as a handle for this random little handleless door near the beginning of the dungeon. I don't know if that makes any logical sense at all, and honestly, I'm so exhausted from being in this area. I'm not going to give it any thought. I want to get out of here. Let's leave. This is like an episode of Scared Straight, but there's not a single white person on set.
Take them off.
Take off those shoes.
Over and over again, James leaps down these infinitely deep holes, diving further and further into his psyche. The level of detachment this gives the player and the idea that we're so incredibly deep into whatever fresh hell we're in really is something else. We go down an elevator and find a room with a dirt floor, but walls and a door that look like they're out of some office building. This is going to sound so weird, but this next area and the way it just looks like a normal fucking building after what we just went through is so hilariously scary I can hardly put it into words. The fact that we're now just walking through this normal place after being surrounded by darkness and rust, hearing big fat monsters walk around our heads and hear ghost horses clopping off in the dark makes it so unsettling. Like, this is something trying to imitate real life to lure us into a false sense of security. Climbing down a ladder leads us to this place similar to that tunnel from earlier, those weird things with big hands just kind of monkeying around. Still terrifying? Yeah, but I'm kind of used to it at this point. We eventually find ourselves in this dirt room with this really creepy stone cube with faces on every side, with this big metal room that just spins around according to the orientation of the face cube. Some of you are going to hate me for this, but I just kind of kept smacking this cube over and over again until I got the right orientation. But in my defense, if I'm able to do that with a puzzle, then it might not be a well-designed puzzle. What is extremely well-designed, however, is the chilling cutscene that follows as soon as we walk through this cube room and into this dark doorway. We are instantly met with the sight of Maria, sitting almost emotionless in a chair behind a set of prison bars. She doesn't look to be too distressed, especially considering that she had 3 feet of cold hard steel driven through her torso the last time we saw her, but it's very clear from the moment she begins speaking that this isn't the Maria we met near the beginning of the game.
Are you hurt bad?
Not at all, silly.
Maria? That thing! It stabbed you! There was blood everywhere!
Stabbed me? What do you mean?
It chased us to the elevator, and then...
James, what are you talking about?
The sultry, dominant attitude she once had is now replaced by something much more soft and caring. She has no memory of what happened to her last, confused at what James tells her. This image of a sexualized Mary that Silent Hill had conjured up is taunting James, so close to the one person he's been fighting to save only to be separated by a single row of bars.
Are you confusing me with someone else? You were always so forgetful. Remember that time in the hotel?
She stands to her feet and says that infamous line.
I'm here for you, James. See? I'm real.
James is so hellbent on getting his wife back, his mind shattered by everything he's been through and everything he's done. He's sunk deeper and deeper into this depraved episode that this image of Maria has to reach out and tell him that she's real, as if she's being puppeted by something greater, trying its hardest to convince this broken man that she's more than a memory, more than just a shallow recreation of the woman he once loved.
Come and get me. I can't do anything through these bars.
Okay.
The rest of this area is largely the same, albeit with a much more sinister undertone with what we just witnessed. As a player, you've got to feel bad for James. It's obvious to me and you that things aren't right, but he doesn't really seem to care. He's been wandering around a town full of flesh-eating creatures and people that seem more like aliens poorly impersonating people than actual people. The lengths that people go to obtain what they want and the levels of denial they put themselves through is palpable. Shortly after, we see another familiar face, but before we can ask her how she's doing, she's screaming at this big old thing, while it just kind of whispers sweet nothings to her. She seems scared, sure, but I don't know, she looks fine to me. She keeps calling this thing Daddy, but before we can really talk to it, it tries to kill James, so, he starts shooting it a bunch and then it dies. Take note of the room we're in, the way it's completely made of flesh, the way that these steel pistons constantly thrust in and out of the holes in these walls. That sounds like I'm joking, but for once I'm being serious. Right when it dies, Angela goes crazy on this thing and throws this inexplicably placed TV on top of its little head, of course with some obnoxious and cartoony camera movement. She doesn't really seem to be that thankful that James just kind of helped her do that. She screams at him, insults him, and gives some dialogue that gives us some context for why she is the way she is.
You don't have to lie. Go ahead and say it. Or you could just force me. Beat me up like he always did.
She just kind of runs off like Eddie, though, so we continue on to this puzzle of a bunch of nooses hanging in a room. I actually thought the puzzle was supposed to be trial and error until I pull all of them in the right order, and after pulling each and every one, I realized that there's a readable sign right behind me that explicitly says, "Mistakenly pull on a criminal's rope, and your reward will be returned to you in a shape most wondrously strange." Oops. There's a separate room with a bunch of hanging corpses that of course line up with the nooses we were just shamelessly yanking on like they were about to open up a fountain of candy. One of these signs has this little nursery rhyme that talks about a bunch of different guys and the crimes they committed, and at the end of the poem is another, but this one says, "How many dead men do you see?" I'm assuming this is asking me which of those little stories ended with someone dying. So, for example, if the third guy it talked about died in some way, I would go pull on the third noose. The problem is that none of them die in these stories. The only death that's actually listed is the very first one, the butcher man who killed someone and served their corpse to guests. I guess you could say the last one could have resulted in a death. A sheriff locked up someone that supposedly set 3 houses on fire and beat him, so maybe that one. I review video games, dude. I don't solve crossword puzzles. Pull the first one, pull the last one. I guess let's see if that did anything. Well, we got a piece of paper on the 6th one, so I guess we got it right, and that's because I'm smart, and it definitely was not a freak accident. So I looked up a guide just out of curiosity, and the answer seems to be the last one because he was the only one that was specifically caught and charged for his crime. The worst crimes committed in the poems were either the first or the second guy, but it never said that they were caught like the arsonist, so it would make no sense that they would be hanging, which of course is what used to be the death penalty. What confuses me is that the last man that the riddle talks about didn't necessarily kill anyone, so I didn't think he'd be charged with being hanged. I guess you could say that law from olden days were a lot harsher, but I would have never guessed that this was even supposed to be a riddle that took place in any time period before 2001. So I, or most people who played this, would have never picked up on that, but when I think of sheriff, I don't think of a cowboy, I think of an insecure 6-foot bald guy stopping me for going 50 on 45.
But if my finger moves a little tiny bit on this trigger, it's gonna make a little bullet come out and kill you.
Paper had a key laying on it, and just up the hallway is a rusty locked door, but after opening it...
Maria? Maria? Maria, no!
He witnesses the death of Maria once again. She doesn't get stabbed or shot in the head or get her arms ripped off or something. She just kind of lays there with some weird darkened texture on her face like it rotted away. James doesn't even see Maria anymore. He leans over the hospital bed and says the name of the woman that he was here for. After a few more moments of grieving, James walks back out of the room, through a graveyard and through another long dark hallway that leads into a room filled with fog and our old pal Eddie. He starts airing his grievances surrounded by bodies, happy that he responded to the verbal onslaught from people with physical violence. Responding to words with a violent and over-the-top action? Oh, I get it. Eddie's supposed to be representative of people that called the remake a masterpiece before it even released. James has a literal shotgun, but Eddie doesn't really feel the need to use the literal revolver currently in his hands as we speak, but it's okay, I get it. James has a purple shotty and Eddie's just trying to show him up with his new pickaxe. I get the symbolism, Ito, don't worry, I won't let you down. After what feels like years trapped inside of the cold, dark, deep abyss of the historical society, the prison, that weird little wooden house area that Angela was in, we finally get some fresh fucking air and find ourselves at a dock. Of course, I book it towards the boat, start rowing for 12 years. I was just kind of sitting in my chair and staring at my TV screen while listening to the ear-piercing hum of my PS2, expecting something to happen after rowing in one direction for a while. I mean, the game has done that with walking before, so I have no reason to believe they wouldn't do it with a boat either. But after kind of just sitting here and feeling my fingers literally decomposing against my controller after rowing from left to right, I commit the cardinal sin and look up what to do. It looks like I am nowhere close to the only person having this problem, so much so that it is cited as one of the worst parts of the game. I guess I just didn't look right enough, because after doing it for a second longer, I see a bright light in the distance. Let this be a message to all those gambling enjoyers out there. Never quit. Always keep going. The second you stop, there's a big old vault of diamonds. A big old vault of Minecraft diamonds just barely out of reach. James gets out of the boat, stances up like he's on the cover of a Yeet album, and sets off for what is effectively the last dungeon in the game, the special place that Mary always spoke of, the answer to the countless questions we've had since the beginning of the game. The hotel isn't necessarily the scariest place in the entire game. It's not like the blood-curdling horror of the prison or the unsettling dark halls of the hospital. It feels like something much more detached. Every single area in this game has had walled-off corridors, windows covered in wooden panels, and doors sealed with plaster and stone, but this place is hazy. Its hallways are long and dark, but there's a persistent gray light that always shines through every window you see. Something about this place feels so much more unnerving than anywhere else we've been, despite how normal it looks. Something about this relatively untouched state of it and the knowledge that this is the place Mary has been talking about since the first line of the game is just what makes it so much more scary. I run around the front courtyard just to make sure I find everything I can find and come across a little mermaid music box. No wonder Team Silent went to shit after this game. They all lost their fucking money to Disney. I walk into the building, pick up the map near the entrance, read the ominous text written over this specific room on the 3rd floor, and the adventure begins. There's a note lying on a counter that talks about a tape James left here. Do I really want to know what was on that tape? This game is particularly good at not answering anything, so please, for the love of God, don't start here. Do I really want to know what James and his wife recorded on that tape at a hotel on a getaway? There's a room that has a piano in it, and I jump out of my seat like a fucking bitch because this loud-ass piano goes off, and wow, what a surprise. It's Turbo Whore Laura. I hate you, Laura. She isn't just here to call us a poopy head then run off either. She's got that letter that was pointed out when we first met her, a letter from Mary. It gives a little bit of insight as to why Laura has been such an asshat to James, ironically, because of Mary. Mary and Laura shared the same hospital and apparently became close friends in their time being there. Of course, it's safe to assume Mary confided within Laura some gossip, some frustrations regarding James and the way he treats her, as the letter roughly states. But the problem is that at the end of this tender letter, she says, "Happy 8th birthday, Laura." James instantly asks Laura how old she is, and she replies that she turned 8 last week. Obviously, something ain't checking out. A concept we're all well familiar with by this point. Why would Mary wish someone a happy birthday 3 years before they turn a certain age? I don't know, is that a Jewish thing? James starts rambling again. I don't know if he's tripping off a bean or something, and then Laura forgets something and runs off. Yeah, I remember what happened last time, Laura. I ain't falling for it this time. The second I walk outside of this room, I am instantly met with these big bad guys from earlier, and this one just starts walking right up to me like there's no problem. While playing this part, I was actually so freaked out and caught off guard that I had to run outside of the building and just sit there for a second to regather my composure. Okay, we're good. After shooting them up Compton style, I come across the first major piece of this dungeon's puzzle. This little music box machine sitting in the middle of this room that keeps playing a creepy ass noise. I know that I already got the first Little Mermaid trademark music box, but there ain't no point putting it here now, so further into the building we go. There's a little hallway full of these leg dudes from earlier and a closet chock full of ammo. How the actual fuck is so much ammo just sitting in some random hotel? What is this, Las Vegas? The hotel becomes the usual affair. Attempt to open every single door, look around in unlocked door room, find a clue that leads you to something else, kill thing. You know, I know I already talked about the ambience of this location, but I really can't get over it in the way it's set up. Every time I see any source of outside light only to be met with a foggy void just reminds me of sitting in my home on rainy days. And it makes for a very cold but oddly comfortable atmosphere. I got so lost in this atmosphere, however, that I just actually got lost. For a long time, actually. There came a point where I was just running up and down every single corridor I could, and even at a point I completely retraced my steps and walked through every room I had already opened, but the result was always the same. There was a suitcase in this one room, but I hadn't found a single code, lockpick, butter knife, C4, nothing. I couldn't find a single damn nothing. I had a fish key that was just kind of chilling in my inventory and had some of this stuff. There was an elevator or two that weren't working, but I was completely and utterly lost. Eventually I came across this room that had a shit ton of Polaroid pictures lying on and around the bed, also next to a briefcase, but I sure as hell didn't have any code to open the briefcase, and the images looked like they were just a part of the scene, so I just ran off, and another 10 hours of fruitless labor ensued. What comes next is easily one of the most tense moments in this entire game, which is the part where you gain access to an employee-only office with a single elevator. Every time you step into the elevator, a siren starts going freaking crazy because of a weight limit that it apparently has. It took me a hot second to realize what was happening, but my heart just kind of sank when I realized what the game was about to make me do. Every single item in your inventory has weight. Every single one. You can't pick and choose what to keep and what to put away. No, what you have to do here is forfeit each and every weapon and means of healing in your inventory and put it all into this little freaking cock-blowing locker so we can walk into this elevator and take it down. I spent this entire time just kind of trying to outsmart whatever limit the game was trying to put on me, giving up my double pump and my rare hunting rifle, but in the back of my mind I knew I was going to have to go down there like a pedophile coming back from an elderly home. Empty-handed. Things aren't going bad so far. Just kind of looks like the back of a Walmart. As an ex-employee of Kroger, that's a cakewalk for me, okay? That job fucking sucked. Eventually, we walk into an office and find the tape that was referenced earlier and a can opener we can use as a knife to stab people in the eye socket with. Am I the only one that likes to imagine, especially in places like old abandoned buildings and horror games, or even real life to a certain extent, the lives of people that used to be here? I walked into this little break room and it looks like such a nice, quaint little place, and the first place my mind went to was imagining all the people that would come down here and rest after a long day of dealing with verbal abuse from elderly people and sweeping vomit off of carpet floors. I exhaust everything to do in this area and eventually find a staircase, but at the end is a single door, and as you can see from the gameplay right here, I was not prepared for it. Keep in mind, we're still weaponless and James is still absolutely geeking off of a bean right now, but these hills ain't gonna silence themselves. James, you got this, man. I know what was in that shit that you took, but you gotta just run out there. You had some basketball training, right? You were trained in the art of breaking ankles and corny ass edits. All you gotta do is run out there and skirt right by him. You just gotta break his ankles, James. Come on, you got this. That's it. That's it, James. That's it, man. You got this, man. Just honestly, this area isn't as scary as I was making out to be. To be completely honest with you, maybe if I wasn't playing on a normal difficulty, I'd be singing a different tune, but considering it seems to be dodging this thing's attacks is impossible here, maybe it's for the best I'm not playing a mode where I die from one hit. Finally, we escape this little series of alleyways and make it into a kitchen where we open up a can full of juicy, scrumptious, and warm light bulbs. The other side of the kitchen leads us to this bar with a nice little purple neon glow, and it kind of reminds me of that strip club from earlier in the game. A comfy little place untouched by the horrors of Silent Hill, but we can't wait. We gotta get going. Oh, by the way, those bulbs we just got were just used to put into this flashlight right here. I don't really know what that did, but there you go. Even after it feels like we made so much progress, I'm still running flat up against a wall. I don't know where the fuck I'm supposed to go or do. I even ran back into those alleyways, but now with my weapons and started blasting shit, but still nothing. Can I just drink the thinner? I refuse to look up what to do. Okay, you know what? Fuck it. I'm gonna be 30 by the time I find out what I'm supposed to be doing. Okay, Google, I hate myself for this. If you unlike and unsubscribe and hate me and try to kill me, I don't blame you, okay? Hey, so remember that pile of Polaroids laying on that bed from earlier that I thought were just environmental decoration? Yeah, it wasn't. I should have known that something like that wouldn't just be random setting dressing. All those remake fanboys were right all along. I'm just a fake fan. One thing leads to another, and we're eventually able to insert these greasy little music boxes into the stand like the dirty little freaks we are, and it gives us a key that we need to unlock this gate that's been taunting me since the beginning of the dungeon. I start getting kind of anxious as I get closer and closer to that room on the 3rd floor, the one marked on our map, knowing that very soon there's going to be some sort of heavy drop, and the second I enter, it's silent. The room's got some desaturated coloring, sure, but it looks completely spotless, as if in the same state it's been ever since Mary and James were last here. The bloom of the bright light outside is almost blinding, and upon noticing this VHS player, I make a beeline towards it. We insert the tape, James takes his seat, and it starts off pretty normally. It's just a video of Mary being recorded by James, admiring his wife as they stay at this comfy little hotel. There's this intense light breaking through the windows behind her, and she sits down, looks out at the lake that surrounds them, and the artifacting happening to the VHS tape begins to intensify, like it's a memory being corrupted. The static gets worse and worse, and another video of James walking up to Mary's bedside begins to play. He leans down, kisses her forehead, and then... it was James. Mary didn't die from a disease. She died because James killed her. His frustration and feeling cursed by having the only woman he ever loved end up being bedridden, his anger at the cruel unfairness of the world, his sadness seeing her suffer. The fact that the only things remaining to be seen throughout this tape are static-soaked, abstract shapes jerking around, the horrors of James' actions just barely out of focus, makes it one of the most horrifying sights in this entire game. You can practically see the degradation and depravity of his character in this single scene alone, covered in grit. Nothing but the enrapturing sound of VHS static playing as a series of pulsing images moves and flashes before you. And what follows is a simple pan of the camera around James for almost an entire minute. He sits completely still, now horrifically and utterly aware of what he's done and where his journey has taken him. The music in the scene is good, don't get me wrong, but I always thought it was a little inappropriate for this scene. I think that some simple static from the TV, complete silence, or a track that maybe drones on a bit more would fit a little better than this weirdly snazzy little piano tune with drums and snare. Laura comes in and James just straight up admits to her what he did. The way that the dialogue is spoken in this scene sounds really weird and not really in a good way, like I said near the beginning of this video. especially with Laura. But what I thought was interesting was the look on James' face after he says out loud that he killed Mary. It's like when you say certain things out loud and realize how weird they are, or when you think a joke is funny in your head, but when you say it out loud, you preemptively close your eyes to make the cringe a little bit more bearable. I didn't notice this the first time playing, but as pretentious as it sounds, you can see the regret on his little PlayStation 2 face. Laura kind of just leaves and let the realization of his sin wash over him, but right as silence fills the room, Mary starts speaking to him through his radio, just like she did at the beginning of the game, telling him that she's nearby and wants to see him. The second we walk out of the room, however, it's clear almost immediately that things have changed. The floors of the hotel are sopping wet, the ceiling is dripping with water, and the most depressing but beautiful tune I think I've ever heard starts playing, the track called Black Fairy. It's a track that, with sound alone, conveys the emotion of this scene, with the way that its synth hobbles and falters under its own weight, trying to keep the same tune, barely keeping itself from crumbling under its own weight. It's a tone that just drones on and on, a constant reminder, a sudden realization that fills the mind of James like a beehive swarming with insects. It's unsettling, it's profound, it's masterful. The walls of James' mind, and thus Silent Hill, are starting to weaken, starting to break down, weakened by how close James gets to becoming whole, or at the very least accepting what he's done. Even when met face first with the crime he committed, he still can't help but feel drawn to the sound of Mary's voice, so off we go again. Getting through a trial and error teleportation door puzzle before revisiting a room from earlier where James finds a pair of headphones and puts them on. Then the camera clips through the window and we're met with this image of a floating bed and a few lines of dialogue between James and the doctor that diagnosed Mary. The conversation between the two isn't really that important, but the 3 years line is. Mary didn't actually live for those 3 years. She didn't die 3 years ago either. The time of her death is quite literally days before the beginning of this game, and the only real reason James says that she died 3 years ago is because his manic mind pulled that number from his psyche, because the doctor told her that's how long she was going to last. It takes a while to get out of the hotel, wandering down damp corridors and exploring some familiar territory, but now it's flooded and there's a fucking fish demon swimming around James' feet and nibbling the dead skin off of his toes. Before the end of the game, however, we pay one last visit to Angela. We didn't really leave off last time on a good note, so it's nice to finally see her back and see that she's she's not well per se, but she's willing to talk to James at least. James crosses over into her Silent Hill and find that it's this old-looking staircase that's constantly on fire. Because of what James did last time, Angela sees him as something of a comfort figure now, calling him mama and jumping out at him to touch his little white face, but she snaps back to reality really quick and even thanks James for helping her. Unfortunately, it doesn't really look like she's gotten much better. She belittles herself, blames herself, all while uncomfortably looking into the eyes of what feels like me, the player. She delivers one last chilling line.
It's hot as hell in here.
You see it too. For me, it's always like this.
And control is given back to the player as she slowly walks further up these fire-engulfed stairs. They could have just had her disappear into the flames in the cutscene, but I believe giving control to the player as she slowly disappears behind a wall of smoke was an intentional decision. It makes it feel like the player can still do something to save her or bring her back, when in reality, the closer they attempt to get, the more burns they get, the more they get hurt. You can't always save everyone, even if you're the quote-unquote video game protagonist. It's so tragic that this is the way her story ends, but this is the way of things. This is the way of the world, of the human mind. There's another wrecked corridor with some amazing camera angles, but it leads to a big rusty room with Maria once again alive, strapped to a bed and vulnerable to the whims of the Pyramid Head. Zzz. What a surprise. They stab and kill Maria, then it cuts to this warp shot of James on his knees with a dark shadow cast over his face. The way that it slowly turns from this Dutch angle to a more normal camera angle conveys through movement alone the slow return of James' mental state, eventually standing back to his feet and saying,
I know the truth. Now it's time to end this.
Yeah, you thought that shit was real cold, didn't you? The boss fight that ensues is just like the very first Pyramid Head fight, running around in circles, standing still and firing, rinse repeat. Ugh, this gameplay is so old and dated. I wish they could make the combat more exciting. Yeah, that's more like it. This is Silent Hill. We finally managed to kill them, but right when the last shot is hurled at them, they both adjust their spears against the ground and just straight up kill themselves. Pyramid Head, the representation of James' psyche, the several jagged sides of the red, rusted helmet, a different side of James' damaged mind. His guilt, his lust, his denial, following him like a lunatic throughout the entire game, killing the woman he loved, stalking him mercilessly, finally opting to end itself now that James has successfully recognized his faults and faced his transgressions head on. Earlier in the video, I talked about some supposedly sexual connotations to what Pyramid Head was doing to the creatures in the apartment building, and the reason I didn't really give a concrete answer to that is because the artist that created Pyramid Head, Masahiro Ito, has specifically stated in a tweet that what Pyramid Head was doing wasn't assault, it was restraint. Pyramid Head wasn't just following James to act as an oppressive force, he was doing it because he was actively trying to get James to see what he did, to face his guilt. He was forcing James to see the manifestations of his sexual frustrations through the mannequin demons from earlier. That's why they're consisted of these long feminine legs and sound like a monstrous womanly moan. They're the hellish result of what James craved, and Pyramid Head was the only one attempting to make him see the truth. Masahiro Ito refers to Pyramid Head as a guardian angel, and while at first that didn't really seem to make much sense to me, the more I gave it thought, the more that really started to make sense. He didn't kill Maria to take something else from James. He killed Maria because Maria was specifically created by Silent Hill to give in to this image that James wanted in his wife. Though that kind of begs the question of why Silent Hill would use something it made to kill something else it made, but the first thing that was made was leading James to an area that he would have eventually found the truth anyway. I don't know. Anyway, but now that James is well aware of what he did, Pyramid Head's only point in existence is no more. Upon further inspection, both of these guys have an egg in their hand, one that's a bright red and one that's rusted. My silly monkey brain just kind of thought these were some stupid video game puzzle things just to be video game puzzly, but I guess I forgot the sheer amount of artistic integrity and care on display, because whoop-de freaking do, even those have meaning too. The crimson egg is Mary, healthy, happy, loving, but the rusted egg is her as she's taken by sickness, hateful, corrupted, sad. James slides these bad little puppies into these slots on 2 different doors, and then a long, foggy corridor stands before us. Nothing more than a conversation between James and Mary. It starts with James awkwardly giving Mary flowers while she lies in her bed, but it very quickly devolves into aggression. Mary outright refuses the flowers, demands James leaves, insults herself, and I know that it's a meme for people that the voice acting in this game isn't good or it's corny, and depending on the cutscene you're watching, that can be valid, but the work done here by Mary's voice actress, Monica Taylor Horgan, is some of the most masterful, talented voice acting I think I've ever heard in a video game, made all the more impressive because of the time period. When Mary nervously asks James to come back, you can hear the regret in her voice, the way it shakes and cracks, and the level of sensitivity you can discern from this entire scene feels so personal. I feel like I'm the one losing a loved one, like I'm the one being verbally abused by a bedridden wife. The most tragic part of it all is that you can hardly blame her. You can tell from the way she speaks that she's angry with the hand she was dealt, and she's scared to die, nowhere close to ready to accepting her fate, and the worst part is that she probably never did. The conversation finally ends with Mary apologizing for her outburst and begging James to reassure her that everything will be okay. Little did she know that that very person, the one she loved the most, the one that went through turmoil just as she did, would ultimately be her undoing, now wandering through limbo for what seems like eternity, plagued by guilt.
James, wait. Please don't go. Stay with me. Don't leave me alone. I didn't mean what I said. Please, James. Tell me I'll be okay. Tell me I'm not going to die. Help me.
Once again, we're given a moment to reflect. An incomparably deep pit of water lies beneath with a million little raindrops falling from the sky. Not a single tune can be heard, only the crashing sounds of rain and James' footsteps clipping through the bottom of the metal stairs. We've been through a lot. James has been through a lot. The beginning of this game saw a normal man, an average Joe, if you will. He's a little dopey, but he's been determined since day one to find his wife again. He loved her. He was quite literally fighting through hell to save her, fighting through a long past psychotic break to save a young girl, help a grieving boy, console a victim of abuse, and watching the personification of the woman he loved die over and over again. He was forced to relive the most tragic and traumatic moments of his life on repeat, his very psyche seeming to falter and decay right before our very eyes. In the end, his sins are clear, and he knows it. Regardless, he knows that the pain has to end, both for him and the crippled image of Maria that still remains seared into his mind. The top of the staircase leads to an empty warehouse, a familiar fenced floor acting as its foundation, while a thick, inescapable fog surrounds it. Windows broken and shattered, nothing more than the steel skeleton of a roof overhead. Who stands before him, however, is all that matters. Much like Maria, she begins with taunting James, but After he tells the Figment image of his dead wife he doesn't need her, she switches up her disposition and tries to tug at his heartstrings. James just kind of says, nah, fuck off, and she gets pissed and turns into a poopy bed demon. I'm not really the biggest fan of how this cutscene plays out. Like, yeah, I get it. James has had some time to reflect on what he did, but he seems to get over it really fucking quick. You'd think that after being shown firsthand about, I don't know, half an hour ago, the way he brutally killed his dying wife would put him in more of a depressive or apologetic state, but I guess he's just kind of ready to leave and go home and play Genshin Impact or something. I'm not saying James needs to fall for the tricks of Silent Hill or something, but I think this would have felt a lot more tragic if he was more hesitant to kill her. Instead of sassing back at her like a side character in Mean Girls, he should be begging for forgiveness. He should be telling her about how much she's been on his mind and how he regrets what he did and how he's been through torture to get to this point. Regardless, the final boss begins here, and no, it's not just Mary. I think James already won that boss fight, but she starts blinking in and out of reality and turns into this thing, floating creepily around with a knife tail and giant fingernails, and she throws fucking moths and shit at you. I find the lack of animation around her movement to be extremely unsettling. I don't really care that might be a product of this being an old game. James was literally mocap, so he's already acting as the grounded humanity here. So seeing that in contrast with something that literally just hovers around so lifelessly, it really is something. After a very long fight, the final shot goes off and the Mary monster falls to the ground, giving us one last shot to fire off to finally end this nightmare. There's a slow fade from black, and we see James sitting at Mary's bedside. There's a sudden cut that shows the dark room that surrounds them, both of them isolated in their own little world. The moment that Mary speaks, James instantly asks for forgiveness. There's a momentary silence as he sits completely still, hands on his lap while he stares at the floor. You can practically see the guilt and the shame on display simply from the way he sits. Mary softly tells James that she wanted to die, like what he did wasn't even wrong, and after assuring her that's why he did it, he very quickly takes it back and tells her why he really killed her, figuring that this is the only chance he'll ever get to live freely again, getting the chance to do what most human beings will never be able to do, tell the truth one last time.
The truth is, I hated you. I wanted you out of the way. I wanted my life back.
The two exchange a few heartfelt words, but ultimately, Mary says something that to this day sends a shock through my very bones. She asks him to move on. Every single time I play this game and watch this scene, I do what humans always do, which is I put myself in her shoes. I could not fathom being bedridden at what should be some of the best years of my life, completely restrained to the cold room of a hospital, suffering through pain daily, unable to form new relationships, not to mention maintaining current ones, and to boot, being fully aware that your final day on planet Earth is slowly approaching. The way she speaks, the soft tone her voice carries, and the gentleness of her words tells me that she still isn't ready to go, but she would rather embrace death than see not the person that killed her, but the person she loved struggle with guilt for a single day longer. James clings to the bed with his hands, and Mary reaches under herself and pulls out a note.
Go on with your life.
Then the camera fades to black. The sheer level of raw emotion on display with the following scene of the letter Mary gave James being read is something that has never been captured in a single video game I've ever played. With every sentence she speaks, she's either trembling over her own words, hanging on the verge of tears, or talking with this gentle retrospective lens that sounds just as beautiful as it does tragic. I don't want to sum it all up in a detailed fashion what she says, because I physically can't take listening to this monologue for a third time during the making of this video, and because I refuse to show anyone this ending without them experiencing it on their own. But I will say that it is a cutscene that will stick with me until the day I die. The sadness in Mary's voice, the acceptance that you gather from the words she speaks and the way her voice sounds is something that never fails to get me crying like a baby every time I beat this game. I've teared up to games before, games like Final Fantasy 15 back in 2017, I was a kid, cut me some slack, or of course Red Dead Redemption 2 in 2018, but this ending, ending, this ending had me sobbing like I just lost someone close to me, or like I knew I was about to lose everything. I had to put down my controller and just sit and think for a moment. The next day I'd drive around town and feel like my perception of the world was changed around me, and for me, that's the sign that a game is something amazing. Mary reiterates some of the things I've already said, beating herself up over things out of her and James' control, reminiscing on old times with James, and overall telling James to live a happy life without her. He did something horrible, but Mary loves him too much to let her memory haunt him, forced to confront one of the most horrific realities that a human being can face, and leaving with only one person in mind, James. The last of her dialogue disappears from the screen, gone forever. Mary's final goodbye to James and the world. We're shown the Toluca graveyard from the beginning of the game, while an optimistic yet depressing track continues to play. Laura running through the graveyard, young, free, careless, and following behind her, James. Silent Hill 2 has stuck with me for as long as I can remember. My middle school years were some of the coldest years of my life, and it's almost funny to think about the fact that a game like this, a game where you run from scary monsters and listen to borderline goofy dialogue, is a game that helped me through so much. The way this game can scare and comfort you all at once is something that is to be praised for years to come, and the masterful work of Masahiro Ito, Akira Yamaoka, Masashi Tsubayama, and the rest of Team Silent that all put their heart and souls into the production of this work of art is something that shall never be understated. Rarely do I use the word masterpiece to describe a game, but I think no other video game is more deserving of that title than Silent Hill 2. Silent Hill 2 isn't just symbolic to me of trauma or sadness or acceptance. It's a game that's emblematic of a time period long lost, a time period that I sorely missed, not only in terms of a culture that I grew up surrounded by, but an industry that's become a shadow of what it once was. One thing I had finally come to realize is the meaning of Silent Hill itself. From the very beginning of the game, I had assumed nothing in Silent Hill was even real, and I don't mean in the way that's true, like where the town creates these monsters from the trauma of those that step foot within it. I mean, I thought the entire game was in James' head, with each and every person he meets in Silent Hill being some poorly fabricated facade created by his damaged mind. This would explain why everyone talks in such a strange and human way, because James is so damaged and detached from reality that even the images of supposed humans that his mind creates feel like they're just barely passable as such, as if his mind on its own still isn't strong enough to create images convincing enough to close him off from reality. Angela is a manifestation of the victimhood that James enacted onto Mary. Laura was a representation of the happier, more innocent years that him and Mary shared together. Was everything sunshine and rainbows? Of course not, but they had an innocent, childish love that sees no sin, no blood, no rust and gore. Eddie is the embodiment of James' guilt and his refusal to take accountability, constantly in denial of the murder he committed, even doubling down and saying that it was deserved because of the bad things that his victims did to him. And while to a certain extent I would say these still are very much metaphors that are closely related to James and his struggles through these characters, there's boatloads of proof that this Silent Hill is indeed a real place, and the people he meets there are just as real as he is. If everything was indeed a part of James' psyche alone, then the very detailed backgrounds of each character, such as Angela and her abuse, or the numerous world-building details found throughout the town, would raise some questions, mainly of where the hell James would even think of those kind of things. Unfortunately, this game not being a creation of James' mind makes some aspects of the game make less objective sense, such as the most obvious detail being the voice acting. I'm not going to say it's objectively good through and through, especially with some of the cutscenes with Laura or the very first cutscene with Angela in the graveyard. Sure, you could say that these people's trauma is what's making them speak in such a strange way, but that feels kind of cheap, and I just can't really say that for myself. Objectively, the voice acting sounds weird, perhaps even dated, and if that's something you personally don't like about the original game, I would understand that 100%. However, despite the objective or realistic qualms I have with it, I think it definitely builds this game's atmosphere up so much more, even if the dialogue at certain points can be extremely on the nose. Some other questions I have are why the town itself is creating puzzles for James, and if it's not the town itself and maybe just a band of crackheads running around that used to live here, why the fuck did they do it? In a way, the town being responsible for everything we see and not just James' psyche makes it feel a little bit more interesting. Sure, there are objective questions with dissatisfying answers, but it makes the town of Silent Hill feel so much more ominous, with a more concrete presence within the story, like it's a character in and of itself. The game has multiple endings as well, the one that we achieved being the one that's regarded as the best ending, if not the most common. There's a lot of contention revolving around these endings, and the conversation doesn't ever really feel like it's leaning in one direction more than the other. Whichever the ending you think fits best will be up to you and what you feel you wanted from the game, learned from the game, or think fits best with James and the journey he went through. A long time ago, when I was in middle school, I watched a Silent Hill video that really kickstarted my love for the series by a YouTuber named Jordan Underneath that explained that the in-water ending was the best ending, and for the longest time, I agreed. After all, it's the darkest ending, and Silent Hill is a dark game, right? So, of course, the ending where he throws Mary into his trunk and then drives into a lake to kill himself because of his overbearing guilt just makes the most sense, right? But after listening to a long interview with James voice actor Guy Seehey, I think his explanation behind why he believes the ending we got, the leave ending, is the best ending. It's something that is articulated very well, and it's really hard to disagree with his interpretation of why that is.
Oh, that's easy. I like the leave ending because that's the one that works for me. I mean, if James was interested in suicide, he wouldn't have gone to Silent Hill to commit suicide, I don't believe. I also don't believe anyone was looking for him. You have a woman who's months away from dying, and she suddenly dies, and that's it. No one's going to ask why she died a little earlier than she might have. It's not like an open murder case that someone's looking for the criminal in. So there's no pressure. He's not running from anyone. He really went back to face his own demons, but I never had the feeling that suicide was the option. And then with Laura in the story and Mary wanting Laura to be taken care of, it was pretty clear to me leave ending is the natural ending. But
that's cool and all, but I think it's pretty obvious that the best ending is the dog ending. One of the key aspects of Silent Hill 2 that always enraptured me was how many risks it takes with the messages it conveys or the presentation of its world. Things get a bit more dicey and, let's say, unsubtle with the next installment in the series, but Silent Hill 2 knows exactly what to say and how to say it. It's not going to be a game that holds your hand when it comes to understanding its themes, but it's not going to make you do something fucking dumb like read item descriptions to have even the smallest grasp of what's happening around you. Most horror games even now have to rely on jump scares, cum-pumping music, and the constant over-the-top violence. But Silent Hill 2 is so much more slow-paced and methodical with its scares. You'll never see some big naked guy full sprinting towards you and fucking screaming at you or some shit. It's always the stillness and slow progression of this game's horror that makes it hit so much different. All the times throughout this game, I was too scared to walk forward because I could hear nothing more than the steady footsteps of something approaching me from around the corner. All the times in this game where some sound effect would play out of my view just to make my hair stand on end, and even better, aspects like this never being revealed to me are precisely the type of subtle horror that makes this game so amazing and disturbing. On top of that, it's a game with themes that I think most people can relate to or identify with, which makes it as a horror experience that much more of its own kind. Most horror games are going to set out to just, horrify you or tell a cool story, give you something to beat off to, which isn't bad, but Silent Hill 2 has aspects of the human experience that it wants to explore and make a core component of its world. It's such a stereotype at this point that Silent Hill fans are overly analytical dipshits, but that's a stereotype born of something true. When you watch these old interviews with the developers of the game, you can hear just from the words they speak the passion they have for the game and the meaning that lies behind each and every monster that Masahiro Ito draws. My description of Pyramid Head from earlier wasn't just something I said because I'm a pretentious college sophomore with a theater major and thought it sounded cool. It's something that Pyramid Head's artist has elaborated on before. It makes me miss the time period where people made games because they adored the craft and wanted to make something with meaning instead of, guys, we made a character that can't reach their toes. There's a reason why the monsters that James sees in this game seem so inherently sexual or feminine, like the nurses or the mannequins, or even to an extent Fleshlip. One of the things I enjoy about Silent Hill 2 is going back and realizing how much of the game came across as odd during my first playthrough, just to find out that there was actually meaning behind those odd occurrences, like the coins in the apartment or the tablets in the prison. But my absolute favorite details that you don't really pick up on until the end of the game are all of the details revolving around Maria. There was an add-on campaign called Born from a Wish that's purpose was to show how Maria was created by Silent Hill to comfort and taunt James, and it paints her out to be a much more tragic character, like an entire person being wasted all for the service of some ominous unknown force pulling the strings. But knowing that she was created specifically for James, specifically to feed into his delusions and further drive him into a state of either insanity or enlightenment, makes her strange personality and seemingly nonsensical actions throughout the game make so much more sense in hindsight. The reason she knew where everything in the town was because she was created by it, that the reason she's dressed like a weirdo is because Silent Hill wanted to taunt James with the very thing his animalistic nature wanted. The reason why her disposition would switch between anger and damsel in distress in the hospital was because that's what James wanted to hear. He wanted to hear this idealized version of his wife beg him to keep her safe, only for her to end up dead all the same, like 3 times. And the way that James hangs his head and almost stays completely silent in this scene as Maria screams at him, it says so much. He's used to this. It's just like the verbal abuse Mary used to put him through. There are so many just small little details like this in the game's FMVs and writing that make it so special. My favorite little detail is when her and James arrive at the bowling alley and she states that she'll stay outside because she doesn't like bowling. Believe it or not, this isn't because Maria is a wannabe alt girl who thinks hating things is cool. It's because Eddie and Laura may perceive her as something else completely, just as everyone who enters Silent Hill does with the creatures and surroundings that haunt it. Or maybe she wouldn't have even been seen at all, which would have destroyed this plan for realization that Silent Hill had on track for James. Aside from the writing, another really powerful aspect of the game's creation is its presentation, but more specifically its music. As it usually goes with my video game reviews, I kinda just say the music is amazing and leave it at that because I have a hard time putting into words what it is about music that appeals to me. I listen to Glorb and Yeet. I really don't think my opinion on the subject will be very nuanced, but I'm going to try to do it here anyway. While not necessarily a product of horror games solely, generic music soundtracks are a plague on even the best games. A 1 out of 10 soundtrack can bring a 10 out of 10 game down to an 8, maybe? I don't know, it's not that bad. The best example I can think of is a game like Destiny, but it's kind of vice versa, where the game itself is extremely bland and the music is really good, but because 90% of the game is the same stale shit over and over again, it makes it seem like the music is just as generic and shitty as it is. Oh wait, this is a video on Silent Hill, my bad. You'll quickly find that most genres have their own set type of music, so, military-centric games will have a lot of drums and fast-paced generic cinema shit. Fighting games has a lot of drum and bass and more fast-paced stuff, or in the case of Marvel vs. Capcom 2, some funky-ass shit. And especially when it comes to horror, if you've heard one of them, you've probably heard all of them. That stupid-ass rising violin, the crashing, the banging. But Silent Hill, even in its scariest tunes, has some of the most unique music I've ever heard, not only to the genre, but gaming as a whole. And that, of course, is all thanks to Akira Yamaoka, the musical mastermind that was in charge of the game's music and sound design. It's funny listening to composers like this talk about their craft, and Akira is definitely nonchalant about it. He's just sitting in his little early 2000s computer room and going, yeah, I just kind of make the music, it is what it is. It's like asking a minimum wage high schooler if they enjoy their job at Taco Bell, but instead of being mad because my order consisted of 2 toppings was butchered by some zit-faced zoomer, I'm sitting here watching the hand of God get closer to me. Fuck. This soundtrack is so good. The soundtrack has its fast-paced and scary tracks for sure, but it's got music that to this day is unlike any other I've ever heard. It seems like such a massive risk to take for a horror game to include music that sounds like this. And this. And this. But it is so apparent to me that Team Silent is consisted of people that care about what they're doing. They don't want to appease some modern audience, and they don't want to Hollywoodify their game. They want to make a piece of art that I think holds up wonderfully to this day. I'm not going to talk about this too much because I don't want to shift focus horribly away from Silent Hill 2, but I feel that I need to give some input on the Silent Hill 2 remake, more specifically the discourse happening around it. When the remake was first teased in that initial trailer, I was almost in tears from how faithful it looked. The music, the dialogue, the beautiful way the town looked, Pyramid Head's big greasy ass muscles flexing around, but the more and more that was elaborated on it, the more and more I began to lose my excitement, and that excitement was replaced by disappointment. The most unfortunate part of the discourse surrounding Silent Hill 2's remake is the toxic positivity being exuded from those that believe everyone that holds any sort of criticism imaginable to be mindless haters or nitpickers, attributing said opinions towards a laughably small group of malicious actors to an entire group of people that simply feel that the remake has lost precisely what made the original game so unique. Like me, the Maria redesign that completely misses the point of Maria and the fact that she's supposed to be a sexualized version of Mary because Silent Hill manifested into reality what James wanted from his wife because of so many years of sexual frustration and denial. Oh, but guys, 3 people said it's because it's woke, so I think that we, a group of 200, should constantly regurgitate the same exact, these anti-wokies, am I right, line over and over and over again when it has absolutely nothing to do with anything. The change in combat that turned the game from a slow-paced horror game to an action game where James no longer seems like a dopey everyman but a fucking Navy SEAL capable of dodging out of attacks like a Dark Souls character. Oh, but guys, the director of the original game says that he enjoys the third-person camera in the remake, so all those pesky fanboys are getting epically owned, and their opinion of the atmosphere being enhanced by the fixed camera angles is completely invalid. Get owned, something something, YouTube video essay fanboy purist, what's another meaningless buzzword I can use to invalidate other people and then claim that they're the ones being toxic? The voice acting in the new game sounds much more realistic and unrelatable due to everyone sounding like pseudo-depressed voice actors doing their best angsty anime impression, along with the overexpression that completely misses that ethereal dreamlike atmosphere that the original built. Like I said before, you can say that you don't like the original voice acting, that's fine. I don't necessarily blame you, but denying how unique it makes the experience feel, yeah, that's cope. Every single comment section you scroll under now that has anything to do with Silent Hill 2's remake is inevitably going to be filled with some grandstanding asshat crying about the haters and the anti-wokies being toxic, which I personally find to be funny because of the overwhelming evidence I found that not only do I rarely, if ever, see harassment of any sort from people who don't like how the remake looks, but in fact, the people in favor of it are very often responsible for the personal attacks, harassment, and overall angry coping I often see. Like, apparently now if you like the original game better, you're a quote-unquote brainwashed incel, another word that has just completely lost all meaning because of greasy dweebs like this. Okay buddy, the rest of us will go outside and make human connections while you continue getting mad at the opinions of strangers on the internet to your audience of unwashed Hello Kitty plushes. Loser. For what it's worth, I don't think the remake will necessarily be bad, especially if it's a game you're casually playing because it's a spooky, scary game, but I'm almost 100% certain that it will be nothing like the original, and not just because I'm a nostalgic hater fake fan, which is what Redditor bootlicking nerds will try to convince you, but because there are so many small details in the original game's line delivery, camera angles, lighting, music, setting, and dialogue, or lack thereof, that make it precisely what it is. I don't hate Bloober. I think the criticism of them is definitely warranted, but their insistence on changing a game to fit a modern audience tells me all I need to know. That they're missing the point. I love this game with all my heart. I cried like a dumb bitch at the ending monologue when I beat the game, and even when watching back through gameplay to make this video, I fucking did it again. This is a game that is special to me. It's a game that, if under the supervision of any other game development company, would have surely failed or have been just another scary horror game that would have been forgotten by time. But the people at Team Silent made a work of art. They made something beautiful, something that has helped people through tough times, and something that has helped enlighten. This is a game that has always been there for me, and is a game that I have no problem labeling as one of my favorites and one of the greatest of all time. I am so beyond happy that I could pour my heart and soul into this video and show it to all of you as a form of entertainment. That's the point of this channel, after all. If you enjoyed this video tonight, please leave a like and a comment of your thoughts. It's nice to see people's opinions in my comment section, and of course it helps boost this video's engagement and push it further into the algorithm. This long-form gaming review and retrospective content is going to become the focus of my channel, so if that's something you're into, I'd highly recommend subscribing so you can stick with me through this YouTube career, and hopefully together we can see where this is all going to go. If you made it to the end, I cannot thank you enough. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you play Silent Hill 2. I hope you understand why I and so many people love it so much. And as always, good night.